guys, we just finished our 2-week vacation in Shanghai and in Tokyo, and I got a lot of questions about our trip, mainly about the language barrier, the cost, how do you plan your trip, how did you know where to go. So I decided to make a little video and kind of share with you some of the things that we had to do to make sure that we were all taken care of. And I decided to share them with you because it was quite an ordeal. So we're going to talk about Shanghai first because that was probably the most difficult to plan for. The first thing that you need to know is that you need to have a valid passport. Now, if you don't, you can always go get one. We ended up going to the U.S. Postal Service. And if I'm not mistaken, most postal services have passport services, but make sure that you check with your local post office before you go. Once there, you got to make sure that you take passport photos with you. You also have to have your valid ID. If you have a minor, make sure that you get all the paperwork done for the minors first. If you're a single parent family, you need to have consent from the other parental unit to make sure that you have permission to take that kid out of the country. So figure all that out on the Postal Service website. They have information about passports, and those will run you about $180, give or take. Now, you will also need a Chinese visa. In order to get the visa, you have to book your trip first. So let me share with you a little bit of the things that you need to take with you when you go get your Chinese visa. One, you need to have your flight itinerary. You need to have a copy of your passport, so you have to have your passport and a copy. You also need to bring an extra set of passport photos, okay, because they're going to ask you for those. You also need to have a copy of your hotel reservation. What I'll do is I'll post the website at the end of the video where you would go to, download the forms and all of that good stuff. But you do need to have your trip pretty much planned out before you request your visa. Now, once you request it, they can approve you from anywhere to a month to 60 days and up to 10 years. The interesting thing is you don't request how long you're going to have the visa for. They tell you how long they approve you for. So that's kind of interesting. Alright, so you're going to need to make 2 trips. One to drop off all the paperwork, and then you need to make another trip back in about 4 days to pick up your visa. They give you the return date and time, and I don't know if all of the Chinese visa places work that way, but the one that we went to did. You dropped it off 4 days later, you come back, you pick it up. You can also work with the travel agent to make sure that you get your visa. There's plenty of places I read that offer that service, so I'm not exactly sure how much they would charge, but it's obviously for your convenience. Now, another thing you want to know about visiting China is that they don't take cards that don't have a chip in them. So if you have an ATM or a credit card that you plan on using that does not have a chip, you want to call your bank or your credit card company and request one of those. They do take major credit cards. We didn't have any trouble using our credit card except for little stands that would only use like cash or something like that. But major credit cards, we had Visa, MasterCard. Those we used without a problem throughout the park to purchase tickets, even to eat out. Now, you will need some cash. The best recommendation that I can make is to call your bank and see if they do currency exchange. They might charge you a fee, they might not. That depends on the bank, but you will need some cash, for taxis or for the little food carts and stuff that don't take credit cards. Once you arrive in China, you're going to need to arrange for transportation from the airport to the hotel. And there were a couple of options that we had. We ended up taking a taxi from the airport to the hotel only because it was so late at night that the metro wasn't running any longer. So know that the metro only runs till about 10 or 11 o'clock depending on the day of the week. So make sure that you know this ahead of time and plan how you're going to get from the airport to the hotel. Okay, you might want to do some research. There's a an app that you can download onto your phone. It's called Explore Shanghai Metro Map. That proved to be very useful while we were in China to get around with the metro. That's the main source of transportation. Although the taxi ride from the airport to the hotel wasn't very expensive. It was about $25. But we had to take 2 taxis because we had 5 people and they're very small. They only fit about 3 or 4 people. And we had a lot of luggage. We had 2 weeks worth of luggage. So we weren't able to fit into 1 taxi. That's another thing you want to take into consideration. So we ended up paying the equivalent of about $50 for 2 taxis, where the metro would have run us about $5 a person. There's a big difference right there as far as how much you're going to spend. You want to take into consideration what time you land, where you're staying, how far you are from the airport. It's pretty close. It wasn't very far, but it was a little scary because a lot of the taxi drivers don't speak English. So another recommendation that I will make is print out the directions from the airport to the hotel. Remember, Disney is a new park in Shanghai. Though, with that said, a lot of people don't know where it is yet, including the taxi drivers. So it's a good idea to print out the directions. Make sure that you have the address written in Chinese Mandarin, because they don't really understand a lot of English. If you get one that speaks English, that's fantastic. If you find someone in the airport that can point you in the right direction, that's great too. But you want to be prepared, just in case. The tickets for the park in Shanghai are a maximum of 2 days. So if you plan on going for more than 2 days, you're going to need to buy extra tickets. We ended up doing 4 days in the park and ended up buying 2 sets of 2-day tickets. They kind of even looked at us a little crazy when we said we wanted 4 days and they don't have a 4-day ticket. So know that in advance. The 2-day ticket was about $145 per person. So it's not too bad. It's pretty reasonable. It is a good idea to try to learn a little bit of Mandarin before you come to China. I watched some YouTube videos, obviously, because that's how you learn everything nowadays, right? To pick up on just some key phrases like, I want this, I want that, I want to go here, I don't want to go there, things like that, just to kind of get you around. The language barrier wasn't a big issue in the Disney resort. Pretty much every employee that we encountered spoke just enough English for us to be able to communicate with each other, some better than others, but for the most part we did not have an issue. And even if someone didn't speak English well, there was someone nearby and they would just go and bring them over and we'd be able to communicate. All our questions were answered. Everyone was super friendly. We didn't have an issue there. Outside of the Disney resort, we really didn't have any issues except for the taxi drivers. That was probably where we had the most issue communicating, because they didn't seem to speak much English, and we didn't venture too far out into the city, so we really didn't have to worry too much about not being able to communicate. Now, if you want to go further out into the city, then yes, you might need to know a little more Mandarin or download a Translator App. There's some really good apps that will actually speak the phrase that you type in. There's free apps, and then there's some that cost a little more just to be able to work offline. Oh, that brings up a good point. In order to be able to use the internet while you're in China, you will need a Wi-Fi hotspot. And we rented ours for, how much? It was $90 for 5 gigabytes, and we were able to use that amongst 4 people because we were only there for a week. Now, the Disney resort does offer Wi-Fi, the hotel offers Wi-Fi, the park offers Wi-Fi. It just really depends on where you're at, whether or not it's, the signal is strong or not. But between the hotspot and the Disney Wi-Fi, we really didn't have an issue. But you will need it in order to communicate you know, to be able to Instagram or YouTube or whatever. So in order to be able to use social media applications, you will need a VPN in order to be able to get past the blocks that the government has, right? There are several apps out there. The one that we used was Betternet. Otherwise, you won't be able to access the social media back in the United States. So make sure that you download one of those before you get to China. We all have iPhones, so having the Wi-Fi hotspot really helped in, to be able to use iMessage and also to communicate back home for anybody that had, Facebook or an iPhone, or even through direct message on Instagram. So that was actually very helpful. It also helped when we were in a taxi to be able to make sure that the taxi was headed in the direction that we really needed, because we did have one incident where the taxi driver dropped us off in the wrong place, and had it not been for the Wi-Fi hotspot, we would have no idea how to get back home. So that was a little scary. I would suggest that you have a Wi-Fi hotspot. Our preferred method of transportation was the metro. It's a lot cheaper than the taxis and a lot more reliable because you know exactly where you're going. You put your destination into the app and it tells you exactly what train to get on, when to get off, how many stops, what other trains that you need to switch over to. So that would be my recommendation. If you want to chance it with the taxi, that's fine too, but it was a lot cheaper and a lot more reliable. I will forewarn you that depending on the day and the hour that you go, it could be relatively crowded. We got lucky for the most part. Most of the times that we got on the metro, there really wasn't a lot of people, but we did experience a handful of times where we were packed in there like sardines. So at least know that much and prepare in advance. We were warned about pickpockets in the city. Not so much in the resort because it's pretty well taken care of, but if you're going to go outside of the resort and venture off and sightsee and things like that, make sure that you safeguard your belongings. Don't carry too much money in cash. And if you do, make sure that it's well hidden. Also, you want to make sure that you carry a copy of your passport. So one of the things that we did that we kind of picked up from just seeing people around us is they would strap their backpacks to the front so that they could have their eyes on their belongings at all times. So that was something interesting, and we picked up on that right away. I got a lot of questions about food, whether or not there's American food in the park. There is. It's very limited. So remember, the breakfast in China is not like back home where you get bacon and eggs and hash browns and things like that. Now, you can find it. Our particular hotel had one dish that had eggs, sausage, hash brown, and something else I can't remember. But it's not common. So know that it will be a task finding something like that. As far as Western food, there was pizza, there were hot dogs, we found burgers, but for the most part, you're going to find, Chinese food like dumplings, dim sum, steam rolls. So, there's a little bit of everything. You really can't go wrong. You're in China, you've got to try it. The dumplings were really good. The kids loved it. The husband loved the steamed buns, especially the ones with the red beans. And they have Mickey-shaped everything. So, if it's Mickey-shaped, it's good. You gotta try it, okay? Now, if you're really feeling homesick and you really need some good old traditional American food, there's a Cheesecake Factory in downtown Disney, so go get your fix there. And I did see when we were in downtown a TGI Fridays and a McDonald's, so you can get your fix at one point or another. I hope you guys are ready for a little bit of culture shock. There were some things that for one, I didn't really know what to expect. I had never really been out of the country except for Mexico. The first thing that stood out to me were the toilets. Even in Disneyland, you will find the squatty potties, which are a little hole in the ground. It looks like a toilet. They're made out of ceramic, but it's in the ground. There's nothing for you to sit on. So, ladies and gentlemen, practice your squats. Now, If you really need a toilet to sit on, there are some stalls, but you have to pay attention. There's little pictures on the door that'll have a little toilet on it. In other words, that's what's going to tell you this stall has a toilet, otherwise it's a squatty potty. The good news is your hotel room, if you're staying at the Disneyland Resort, chances are you're going to have a regular toilet, so don't worry there. Outside of the resort, I can't make any promises. That's really going to depend. But chances are that's going to be a squatty potty. The cast members were outstanding. They were super nice, incredibly helpful, and they're willing to go out of their way for you at any cost. That was amazing. Another thing that was really different was the lack of personal space. So, you know, we're used to stand in line, wait your turn, all that great stuff. Well, one of the things that was really interesting to me during this trip was if there is a little gap between you and the person next to you, someone is going to get in front of you in line. And then try telling someone that they can't do that in Mandarin when you don't know how to speak the language. It's not easy. So we learned really quickly to form little human walls and not leave gaps between us, because people will push and shove and they will get in front of you and they don't care. And it wasn't one instance. This happened in every single line that we were in, whether it was to get into the park, whether it was to get on a ride, whether it was to meet a character, whatever the case was, people will get in front of you no matter what. One thing that I really liked about China is that they don't charge taxes. There's no sales tax, and it's also not customary to tip. So, you know, whether it's a taxi driver or a server at a restaurant, you're not supposed to tip. They find it offensive. If you try to give the money, they'll refuse it. So know that you don't tip and you don't pay taxes. Alright, so now let's talk about the park. The program will say that the park opens at 8 o'clock, but every time that we try to get there at 8 o'clock, there was already people there. So what time the park exactly opens, I have no idea, because we never made it early enough to find out. As far as the rides are concerned, there are fast passes, so just like the other Disney parks, the map will tell you what rides have fast passes. Now, in order to get your fast pass, you don't go to the ride per se. There's a kiosk, or there's like a little, they almost look like ATM machines in each land, and that's where you get the fast passes for the land. So it'll tell you the wait times, and it'll tell you if fast passes are available and what times they're available for. So that's, you know, pretty cool, because all the fast passes for that land are consolidated into one area. The best rides that you absolutely need to make sure that you get on is my personal favorite, Pirates of the Caribbean. That ride just trumps every other Disney ride that I have ever been on, ever. And I will never go on another Pirates ride again. So definitely make sure that you get on that ride. If you get to the park early enough, you don't even need to wait in line. You could just walk right on. At one point or another during the day, the ride may get up to an hour, maybe a little bit more. But first thing in the morning, there's no way make that your first ride. There is no fast pass for Pirates. Your next must-do is going to be Tron. You absolutely need to ride it at night. It's the best experience. There are fast passes for Tron. We got our fast passes around 2 or 3 o'clock for the evening. Now, remember, the park is new, so crowds might grow and times might change, but it'll tell you what your estimated return time is. So if you can possibly plan it for an evening ride, that would be my recommendation, because it's a great ride during the day, but at night it looks even better. There is a show in front of the castle, and I would highly recommend it. It is so much fun. There's so much activity going on. You get to see Merida on her horse. You get to see Snow with the 7 dwarfs. Aladdin and Jasmine come out. There's just so much going on that you just can't miss it. There's only one fine dining restaurant inside the Disneyland park. Everything else is counter service or quick service. So there's really only one place where you can dine with characters, and it's going to be inside the castle, and that's where you get to take you get to have dinner with, or lunch or dinner, sorry, with Prince Mickey, Princess Minnie, and then you have Daisy and Donald dressed in their Duke and Duchess outfits, so they're super cute. The food is delicious. I can't complain. It was worth every penny. You do need reservations for that, and what I'll do is in the description, I'll go ahead and include the number for that. Now, food and merchandise in Shanghai Disneyland are very comparable in price to both the Disney World and Disneyland Resort. It's, very similar in price, not much of a difference. The only difference was the water. It was a lot cheaper. It's like $1.50 a bottle, which I wasn't complaining about. You can't drink the water in China. They do have drinking fountains, but beware because there are faucets that are meant to wash your hands with, and then there's the drinking fountains, which are safe to drink from in the Disneyland Resort. I wouldn't trust anything outside of the park, but in the park, everything's new. You should be okay with it. But I was, I'd rather be safe than sorry, and I would just buy the bottled water, which I wasn't complaining about at $1.50 a piece. Alright guys, so I hope that answered most of your questions as far as the Shanghai trip was concerned, and I will be making another video to talk about our trip to Tokyo. So, see you soon!